Hello again, Craig here with another Fukushima debunking video. I get massive trolling on my channel dealing with Fukushima because I do radiation testing all over the country. I sell radiation detection equipment. I've been specializing in this for many years. And there's so much fear involved that the fear is the most powerful factor. So when you tell people facts about Fukushima, they tend to go off the wire and not believe you just because they would rather have the confirmation bias of hearing all these videos that tell them they're going to die. For some reason, they get mad at me when I tell them they're not going to die from Fukushima. Well, in all this trolling that I get on my channel, I always get dared, well, go in the end, after I show them fact after fact, things like, well, no, there's no deaths in Fukushima, no, from radiation. No, there's no increases of cancer from radiation and cancer since 2011. No, there's no dead or dying oceans due to radiation. No, there's no high levels of radiation that's going to really affect anybody except inside 3 containment buildings in Japan. And then, of course, people of Japan actually live longer than anyone else in the world, even to this day, after Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Fukushima. So in the end, they always dare me, well, go live there then. After all that, they have nothing else, nowhere else to go. It's like, go live there. Well, I can't go live there. I don't have a passport. I'm having troubles at home here. But I found somebody that does live there, and somebody that actually moved there. On the phone with me from Hawaii, I have a special guest. Now, I normally don't have guests on this show, but I have on the phone right now Steve Terada. I'm calling him from Hawaii, although he actually lives in the Fukushima Prefecture. So, Steve, hello. Can you hear me?
Hello, Craig. Hi.
Okay. I'm going to give a brief introduction. Steve, he's a third-generation Japanese-American whose grandparents immigrated from Japan to Hawaii 112 years ago. He was with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Seattle, where he was Real Estate Division Chief. Steve was Chief of Real Estate for the U.S. Army in Japan and managed real estate on Army bases from Tohoku to Hiroshima. After retiring from the Army, he went to Fukushima to help with disaster management. He learned that Fukushima suffered from a negative reputation, and local residents asked him to write objective stories about the prefecture so the rest of the world would learn its true condition. So Steve is actually doing legwork on the ground in Fukushima, and he went there intentionally on purpose. Now, Steve, tell me the brief story about you were actually in Japan in 2011, March 11, 2011, when the earthquake and tsunami hit. Why were you there, and tell us a little bit about what happened that day.
Sure. That was a Friday in 2011. I was in Okinawa on a business trip. It was in the afternoon. We were finishing up our briefing. I was giving a briefing to the commander at a base in Okinawa. Someone ran in, whispered in the commander's ear. He stood up and said, wow, there's been a big earthquake up north. Then we finished the meeting. As we were walking down the hallway, I looked into some open doorways, and guys were glued to television. So this was about an hour after that notice, so about 3:30 or so. We peeked in, and on the TV screens, we saw tsunamis coming in and basically washing cities out into the ocean. And I told my colleagues, this has got to be some kind of an old picture or something, this can't be happening today. Well, obviously it was happening, and that was my introduction to the triple disaster in Fukushima. I was with Kamzama, made it back the next day, luckily, because the airports had been shut down, and the day after started pulling 12-hour shifts in the Army's Emergency Operations Center to support the disaster. We had an operation going on from the Army, providing some support, and we were the backside support to those guys. When June came around, 3 months later, after the disaster, some friends from Hawaii, some Rotary friends, because I had been in the Rotary group for about 20 years, contacted me in Japan and said, hey, Steve, we're going to Fukushima to present a large donation check to some of the schools and do some humanitarian work. And if you recall, worldwide, everybody mobilized and was trying to raise money and provide support to Fukushima. And and these guys in Hawaii had done the same thing. So I said, sure. I jumped on the bullet train in Tokyo, joined them, and we went up to Fukushima. And their base was in Fukushima City. I didn't know where we were going, but that's where we ended up. That first evening, when we were out having dinner, I received a call from my boss back at the Army base in Japan, and he had found out I had taken 1 week leave, annual leave, to go help out with the disaster. But Fukushima City was within the 80-kilometer exclusion zone that the U.S. government had established, and he said, if you're in Fukushima City, you're in the wrong place. You need to come back. And I said, I am in Fukushima City. I work for the government. I am coming back. I'll be back first thing tomorrow morning. Before I left, I promised the Fukushima people that I had met and was working with that I would return someday. It took me 7 years to get back to Fukushima, which was last year. After I retired from the Corps of Engineers and went back to Honolulu, I was already an American Red Cross disaster volunteer in Japan, Seattle, and Honolulu, but I wanted to help with disaster recovery in Fukushima. That was unfinished business for me. So I started contacting folks and eventually arranged a recon trip in May with my wife last year. And we went to Fukushima, frankly, looking for projects to help out, like I remembered back in 2011. But there weren't any projects. The whole place had been cleaned up, buildings rebuilt. It looked like a normal city. It looked like Honolulu.
Okay, Steve, let me interrupt you here first for a second. Sorry about that. Basically, one thing I want to back up. You said you were 80 kilometers from the meltdown, correct? From the power plant.
That's correct.
80. Okay, it almost sounded like 18, but 80. Now that was imposed by that number you gave that you should not be there was imposed by the U.S. government for people overseas. Is that correct?
That's correct. Right after the March disaster, the United States government, through the embassy, issued that exclusion zone warning that U.S. citizens should not be within that zone. Now, I met another doctor from the Northeast who said, I got that notice, but I didn't leave because I had to stay. So, there was no Gestapo that came to take you away. But I happened to work for the Department of Defense. And when they said, you're on notice, you need to come back, I had no choice personally.
Okay, so the 80 kilometers, now, that wasn't the Japanese government. Did the Japanese government, was that part of the evacuation zones, the Fukushima City?
The Japanese government's evacuation zones were much smaller. They started with just a few kilometers, then increased it to 20, and eventually increased it to 30 kilometers.
So you're still twice as far, at least twice as far as what the Japanese government was concerned about, right?
More than twice as far.
Okay.
Is the zone that the U.S. established.
Okay, let me explain something for the audience here, because there's a lot of confusion when we say Fukushima, because it's become a buzzword for radiation now. Basically, let me give a little brief synopsis here, and I'm going to show some maps. Now, Japan is a relatively small country compared to the United States. It's slightly smaller than California, the entire country. The Fukushima Prefecture is the third largest prefecture. Now, when I say prefecture, essentially, and Steve, you can tell me whether this is correct or not, here in the U.S., we would consider that kind of to be a state, correct? A prefecture?
That's correct. That's correct. 47 prefectures, and the prefecture is the first level right below the national government.
Yeah, okay, because Japan has a strange way of there's a country of Japan, then you have regions which don't really have governments, then you have prefectures, you have cities, districts, towns, and villages. It gets a little bit different. But if you think about when we say Fukushima now, we're basically talking about kind of a state or a prefecture of Japan, and there's 47 of them. Now, those are small compared to what states we have here generally, but the Fukushima Prefecture is the third largest, and it's about the size of the state of Connecticut in geographic size. But the population is actually about half. There's about 3.5 million people in Connecticut that live there. The Fukushima Prefecture is about 1.8 million that actually live there in Japan. And they only lost about, I think it was around 2% of its population immediately following the disaster zone, people who moved away. It wasn't very much. Because there was an exclusion zone. And as you just heard Steve say, the exclusion zone wasn't this massive area. It wasn't the whole prefecture. It was only a very small area of the prefecture. About the size maybe of a county here in this country, depending on what state you live in. So it wasn't like a massive area that was evacuated. It was a big area, but it wasn't as massive as a lot of people think. Now, there were about 1,800 Fukushima Prefecture residents that were confirmed dead or missing as the result of the earthquake and tsunami, but not a single one from radiation. There were a lot of people that actually died because of the evacuation, but it was just because of the fear of radiation, not radiation itself. Okay, something else I want to ask you, Steve, before we get very far, because this is going to come up so much in the trolling on my channel. Are you paid by either the Japanese government, TEPCO, or any other organizations for you to do what you're doing right now?
Absolutely not. I'm a volunteer. Moved from Hawaii to Fukushima. It's hard for people to understand that, but to answer your question, I'm a volunteer. I do not work for the government, organization, or any person who benefits from what I'm doing.
And nobody tells you what to say?
No, nobody tells me what to say. I decide what I want to say, and I have sort of ruffled a few feathers, but that's the way it goes.
And if you wanted to talk negatively about TEPCO or the Japanese government, you're free to do so, correct?
Yes, I am, absolutely.
Okay, good. All right, go back to your story now. I'm sorry to interrupt all that. About you went there and you found that things were already pretty much taken care of. There wasn't much for you to volunteer. So what was your mission then at that point when you saw that?
Sure. I met, almost 100 Fukushima people last year. We sat down in small groups, and I wanted to understand, what the disaster was like, etc. And what they told me was that, we really appreciate you wanted to come over here and help us, but there's not much you can do. Our houses are fixed, our kids go to school, we go to work. What we have a big problem with is what the world thinks of Fukushima. And this is where they describe this term that I heard it first last year. It's called a negative reputation about Fukushima. And that negative reputation is that the world still thinks that Fukushima is an unsafe place to live because of high radiation levels. You cannot eat its agricultural products, and you certainly cannot eat its marine products like its fish. They said, this is so wrong, but people around the world do not have the facts, so can I share the facts with other people? They asked me to do that. And I said, well, I understand the mission. That sounds like a good thing to do. I need to go decide whether I want to do that. So I went back to Hawaii and did a lot of online research with U.S. universities, U.S. government websites, and I researched it as if my life depended on it, because my belief was, for me to write about Fukushima, I could not do it from Hawaii. I had to go to Fukushima, stay there, look around, and then explain to people what I found. So that was how my mission was created, and the mission is to tell the facts as I see it in Fukushima.
Okay, when you say we, I think you mean you and your wife have moved there, correct? Is that what?
My wife and I have moved to Fukushima City, yes.
Okay, and on the map we're going to be showing Fukushima City, and as we talked about before, is basically the capital of the Fukushima Prefecture. When we're talking about the Fukushima nuclear Daiichi, Daiichi is I think how they say it, Daiichi.
Daiichi?
Yeah, the nuclear power plant is on the coast, and that's on the far east side of the prefecture, right on the coast of the Pacific Ocean. There's also another power plant, the Fukushima Daiichi, I think that's how they say it, correct?
Daiichi, D-A-I-N-I, and it's about 20 kilometers south of Daiichi nuclear power station.
Yeah, and so but the only one that they both had problems, but only the Daiichi was the one that melted down. I think that's a total of 12 reactors between the two plants. Are you aware of the number of that?
Frankly, I am most familiar with Daiichi. I have not been to Daini, so I cannot speak about the other nuclear power stations, no.
Daiichi has 6 reactors, though, and 3 of which had severe problems, correct?
That's correct.
Do you speak fluent Japanese?
No, I can speak some Japanese based on my time with the Army in Japan. I was in Japan for 6 years, but I am not fluent. So I have learned, going back to the Army time, to use interpreters and translators effectively to learn what I need to learn.
The people of Japan understand English fairly well anyway?
In Fukushima, the answer is, I would say, no. My circle of contacts that I developed, professional people and local people, speak some English, and that's sort of an anomaly because if you were to travel around Fukushima and you speak to tourism people, for example, they will tell you that most of the folks that go to Fukushima are other Japanese people. Fukushima does not get a lot of foreign tourists who speak English, Spanish, etc., etc. And that is one of the problems that Fukushima Prefecture has. It's an unknown quantity, and the people around the world basically know about Fukushima from what they've seen in the media back in 2011. And that's where those perceptions were formed. But very few people have actually gone to Fukushima Prefecture, which is sort of country, and checked it out. I've learned that from traveling all over the prefecture and talking to a lot of people. Who do you get here? I mean, who comes here? And it's mostly Japanese people.
So you don't have a big swarm of foreign visitors trying to do more negative press about Fukushima? You don't see a lot of that?
No. I mean, you do have folks who come for dark tourism, and they have an agenda, a prearranged agenda, from what the local people have told me.
Yeah.
But there aren't that many people. It's just that when they write an article, those are the only articles that go out that the people in the rest of the world see. So it reinforces this negative reputation belief.
It's what sells. Fear sells.
Yes, good news. The good things that have been happening in Fukushima, which are many, which I've learned, nobody wants to talk about it overseas because it's just normal news. Do you want to talk about how things are normal in New York or in Honolulu? No, you don't.
Yeah. Okay, now you're living in Fukushima City, which was never officially part of the exclusion zone as per the Japanese government. It's some 50 kilometers away from the nearest evacuation zone, is that right?
That's correct. But let me add that if you were to look at the maps of the direction of the radiation plume that came out after the hydrogen explosions at the nuclear power station, the direction of the plume was northwest and then southerly. It went northwest and passed over where my house is. So Fukushima City, when you look at all the different radiation readings within the prefecture, is still what I consider to be a safe level, but it's higher than in the other parts of Fukushima Prefecture.
In Fukushima City, did you see, was there already removal of soils and that they've done in a lot of the other parts of the prefecture?
Yes, Fukushima City, like all the other urban places in Fukushima, had the decontamination projects completed, which included power washing from the roof down and removing 5 centimeters of soil from all around the property and replacing it with new soil. That happened, and I confirmed it with my landlord when I was looking at the house, because that was obviously important to me.
Okay, so the soil removal, even though Fukushima City was not in the exclusion zone, they still did decontamination out some 80 kilometers away. They still did decontamination. Was there?
Yeah.
But what about? I think they really couldn't do much decontamination still in the forests. Now, Japan, that part of Japan, from what I've seen on the map and by the satellite images, it's a lot of wilderness, a lot of forests, and clusters of towns and cities. Now, they weren't able to do much of anything in the forest areas, right, in the mountains. Is that right?
That's correct. The Japanese government decontaminated urban areas, places where people lived, worked, went to school, traveled, etc., and made a strategic decision, a policy decision. They were not going to try and decontaminate forests. The rationale, as I understood it when I talked to some of their technical people, was that the cesium, radioactive cesium, which is the major concern in Fukushima, would be in the, when you're in a forest, you have all these brush and stuff that's laying on top of the dirt. So if they were to remove that and expose open dirt, there was a great possibility of floods in the forest. In other words, you're taking away the forest cover. They did not want to do that. And that's how it was explained to me, and why they made the decision not to try and decontaminate the forest by taking away the forest covering on the ground, which contained a lot of the cesium.
And if you're removing about 2 inches of topsoil, you're probably going to kill a lot of the trees as well.
Well, you kill a lot of the brushes. The trees, like for example, when I went to the farmers north of where I live, they said when they were decontaminated, not only was the soil taken away, but they power washed and stripped some of the bark that needed to be taken off. But they tried to keep the trees as much as possible.
Okay, so generally that, for those of you who don't understand about radiation, the power washing and the removal of soil, when there's fallout that occurs, these are beta particles. It's a radioactive isotope that attaches to a piece of dust or dirt. It goes up in the air and it eventually floats down into what we call fallout. So basically, as long as that fallout, that dust or dirt that's been irradiated, is washed off of homes and off of streets, the area is going to go back to normal radiation levels. It's the areas in the soil, because some of that dust will go into the soils, and the removal of the topsoil is to try to remove that possible cesium or whatever else may have been in that fallout, to try to get it out of the area, to bring down radiation levels back down to normal. That's the whole idea behind the soil removal and the power washing that Steve's talking about. It's to remove those beta particles. Gamma was never an issue with Fukushima, except right there inside of the containment building. And alpha isn't as much of a concern either. And as far as the beta particles, you just don't want to ingest them. You don't want to eat, breathe, or drink them. That's the beta particles, the dust. That's about it. Otherwise, it's not going to really do any damage to anybody. And so we're talking about an area now that wasn't even in the exclusion zone. Now, there are areas that are still exclusion zones, and some areas have been reopened for the public to move back into their homes after the decontamination efforts. And they expect us to open up more of those zones as time goes by. Have you seen some numbers on that, Steve, and how many people are actually moving back?
Yes. Those areas, which are a little less than 3% of the total land area in Fukushima Prefecture, are absolutely the most controversial areas as far as Fukushima is concerned. And the reason is they are the areas closest to Daiichi Nuclear Power Station, and they had the heaviest radiation contamination, a lot of which is still there. So what the federal government decided to do was they would decontaminate, clean up, and work on the rest of the prefecture first. All those projects have been completed. And over the last couple of years, they focused their resources and money on these evacuated areas. Their goal is peel it layer by layer. Start in one small area, decontaminate it, decontaminate more, try to bring people back, rebuild, start up their train stations and their bus services. That is the strategy for the evacuated areas. And the last area that is not open yet, I happened to meet with its mayor, because one of his citizens is a colleague of mine. So we had a meeting with the mayor, He spent a lot of time trying to explain his philosophy and his strategy for recreating a city. And Craig, make no mistake about this. In that evacuated area on the coast of Fukushima, they're recreating a world because so much of it was destroyed. They are recreating human life back there on the coast. So a lot of money is going back into it, projects, planning, public works things that I'm familiar with, and they're slowly trying to reopen the areas. It's going to take a lot of time because decontamination takes time.
I have to laugh sometimes when people say, well, they're not doing anything. And so many billions of dollars have already been spent on this effort. It's amazing that people even say that. The Japanese government could have just walked away from that plant. There's so many things that they could have done that would actually validate your concerns that they aren't doing anything. But if you're on the ground there and see what's being done, they're doing about everything humanly possible to try to get this situation back to a fairly normal state. It's amazing people go ahead.
That's something. There was a newspaper article that came out in April of this year that from a survey of Japanese people asking whether they thought that Fukushima Prefecture was making progress in its revitalization. And half of the people thought that there was no progress or very little progress. And, when I sat back and I looked at it and I thought, well, first of all, a lot of these Japanese people live in Tokyo or Osaka or Kyoto, and they'll never come up here. All they know is what they read in the newspapers or see on television. The revitalization, I learned very quickly, is so vast and complicated that the normal person cannot follow everything that is going on. There is radiation science involved, public health, public works, logistics, business revitalization, and as I said, they're trying to build new cities, and all of it, frankly, under hostile conditions from what the world thinks is going on over there. So it's quite a challenge, and it's a situation where, and when I talk to my family and friends in different places, they don't know what they don't know. So I'm trying to explain to them the facts of what's really going on in Fukushima. And they say, wow, I had no idea all that stuff was going on. I said, yes, because the word doesn't get out. Those Japanese people are just plugging away at what they're doing, but no one really explains to the world what they are doing or what they have accomplished. What they are doing is marketing for the new sake or some new event that happens in Fukushima Prefecture, but that is not what the world needs. Those are not facts. The world needs facts and information to truly understand what has happened in Fukushima. Since they had all of those media reports in March 2011 that this place was blowing up. So it hasn't happened, and that's why we are where we are.
Have you been to some of the exclusion zones, besides the plant, which we'll get into later?
Yes, I've been through virtually all of the major city areas there. I've gone into the exclusion zone 5 times. And you can't just go there. I mean, you go through checkpoints, you present IDs. There's a process to go in there. And some areas you can only go in with residents, which I have done. Like I went in with a resident of Futaba. That's an F like Frank, Futaba. They abandoned their house when they were told to do that by the government. They piled people and their possessions into a 4-door sedan. It was so filled they couldn't take their dog with them. They were in such a hurry to get out of there, and once they drove on the road, all the roads were backed up as people tried to get out. So it was a very, very bad scene back in those days, and that's what the world remembers. But I'm trying to tell the world it's not like that now. It's almost 9 years later. Japanese people are very smart, they're very resourceful, and they've done a lot of good things there.
The exclusion zones, when you go there, And you have I've seen some pictures, you have your own Geiger counter, and you probably use it quite often, especially when you're going in those exclusion zones. But the levels that I've ever seen, all the numbers I've seen, and you can go to Safecast and some of these others online websites that show live radiation readings there, and they'll have hundreds of millions of readings that you can actually look at that are archived. And the levels that you see in those exclusion zones where nobody can live yet they certainly aren't deadly unless you're going to maybe live there for the rest of your life. It's like you would have to be there for many years before you had even a 5% chance of getting some sort of radiation sickness. Isn't that true?
That's correct. I mean, one of the most important things is when I go to the exclusion zone with a resident or someone else from Fukushima, we decide in advance that if we don't have to stop someplace, we won't. But if we do stop, it will be for a matter of minutes if the radiation levels are high, because that will then kind of protect us from absorbing too much radiation. You don't want to sleep over there overnight. We're just there for a few minutes. We go to one site, we're looking at certain things, we talk to people, and then we move on. That's how we do it in the evacuation zones.
Okay, now explain about these, and people online are saying, oh, they're removing and they're turning off all these monitoring stations all throughout Fukushima and maybe other parts. Explain these monitoring sites, what we're talking about when we talk about a monitoring site.
Sure. Almost immediately after March 2011, the national and prefectural government came up with a plan that they needed to post mechanical radiation measuring devices throughout the prefecture. And till today, they have almost 4,000 measuring devices placed everywhere in that prefecture, north, south, east, and west. I sent you a couple of pictures, just as a couple of examples of where the monitoring stations are. The picture of me standing next to one is right outside the major train station in Fukushima City. Another picture of a measuring device that you see through a child's swing and seesaw set is at a place called Shinobu Park, which is probably the most popular park in Fukushima City. And the third one is above the street on sort of hanging from the sign on the top. You'll see another measuring device so that as people are driving through the area, and that's in the evacuation zone, they can see what the recording of the radiation level is. So those are just three examples of the almost 4,000 radiation sites that are throughout the prefecture.
And the point is that they're not hidden. They're like public view. It's like a billboard, like a road sign. They're everywhere. It's not like you have to look for it, and it's not like it's being hidden or purposely misleading, because the one that we're showing now of you at the train station, you're holding a Geiger counter and you're comparing readings. And what did you find when you compare readings to these public signs?
My readings on my personal dosimeter were very similar to all the government readings. And let me add one more thing, Craig, you may be familiar with this. There is a third-party civilian site called Safecast. Safecast is probably the largest aggregation of radiation data in the world right now. And this started right after the nuclear accident, where local residents frankly did not trust what the government readings were. They didn't trust what the government was saying, and they didn't know how safe they were. So they went out and got their own Geiger counter dosimeters and started taking readings. Well, those readings were put into a site that developed into this massive database called Safecast. And it had nothing to do with the government. These are civilian people. If you go online and you write in all caps, Safecast, you will run into the site and you will say, wow, this is quite amazing. They have radiation readings taken throughout the prefecture. I've looked at those. I've looked at the government readings. I look at my readings. They're all very consistent. The Safecast guys will say on the record that their numbers, their radiation readings, and the government readings are very consistent. So I tell people, because it's quite common for Japanese people to say, well, we don't trust the government. We don't trust anything that the government says. And I say, I got you. I come from the United States. I know exactly what you're saying. But can you trust the facts? Can you trust the data? So you got the government data, you got SafeCast data, you got Steve's data, and they're all the same. So what can you say about that?
Yeah.
Frankly, they have nothing to say about that.
Yeah, and I'm going to link all those below. There's not only SafeCast, but there's other sites as well that have live radiation readings, which aren't government ones. Now, the SafeCast site, interestingly enough, when it started, like Steve sort of alluded to, it was sort of intended to show how maybe the government was lying to you, and it turns out that, well, they weren't. And that's what's kind of amazing. But the site stayed up, and the readings are there. You can go live and basically see anywhere, almost in Japan, the whole country, and other countries as well. SafeCast does a little bit in South Korea. There's a few other readings for SafeCast. There's other sites that go worldwide. And you can see worldwide, the radiation levels are not high anywhere in the world other than right there in Fukushima Prefecture in the exclusion zone. Even the exclusion zones aren't really that dangerous. There was almost no reason for some of the areas to be evacuated in the first place. But as precautionary, that they did, and then they did a decontamination, and people are moving back. So yeah, the SafeCast site is a good one, just because that was initially set up for people who were doubtful about what the readings were.
Right. And Craig, let me add, from the government side, in terms of transparency, there is information online. If you look up Fukushima International Association, go to their site, you can look at radioactivity information. There are interactive maps that drill down to your neighborhood, which is what I did when I was looking to rent a house in Fukushima City. I went to the 3 sites closest to my house on a regular basis to see what the radiation readings were. And they match up very closely to my personal dosimeter, by the way, before I leased the house, because I wanted to know that where I was going to live was safe. And residents do that. Foreigners should do that. If they're going to Fukushima and you're going to different tourist spots, you can drill down to the measuring devices in the areas that you're going to see and look at the radiation readings. So I encourage people to do that. I started doing that as soon as this Fukushima discussion started.
And what you're going to find when you do that, everybody, you're going to find that the radiation levels in Japan are pretty much the same as everywhere else in the world. Japan is not elevated, other than the areas that are very close to the plant. You will not find radiation. You'll find radiation readings higher in Denver, Colorado, or parts of Iran. There's so many places in the world where you're going to have a lot higher radiation. Seoul, South Korea is actually a lot more radioactive than Tokyo. You're going to find that the levels are normal. And people that are concerned about this Olympics, we're going to talk about the Olympics coming up here as well, there really is no reason for it, because these people are only going to be there for a short time, and there's no high radiation readings where the Olympics are going to be held in the first place. But anyway, the radiation readings, you can pretty much trust them. I ask people all the time, they keep saying, well, the Japanese government's lying to you, TEPCO's lying to you. I say, well, how are they lying to millions of Geiger counters worldwide? Because even if they were to produce fake readings on these public reporting stations, how long do you think they could get away with that? Because it would be absolutely extremely transparent immediately that they were lying if the numbers weren't matching. But the numbers are all matching. So we're not getting false readings from Japan. We just aren't. And it's the same as the rest of the world. We're not. How can they lie to a Geiger counter? Show me the science behind that. Anyway, okay, in these exclusion zones, you have a lot of abandoned homes. Are people returning to continue to take care of their homes and leaving, hoping to return? Or how many people seem to be returning into the areas that they are allowed to return in? Do you have any information on that?
When I went into the exclusion zones, it seemed as if the houses that were there in 2011 have either been demolished or are being demolished. I don't know if your audience is familiar with real estate, but if you leave a property vacant for 8 or 9 years, bad things are going to happen to that property.
Yeah.
And what the Japanese people do is they knock them down and they rebuild. or the government is building new houses in the areas that people can return to encourage the evacuees to move back into the areas. How successful they are is another discussion.
Okay, so some people have been allowed to return to their homes. Do you have a general feel of how many do return?
Yes, I've got some examples for you. When I first came to Fukushima this past February in the winter, I was invited to stay in an evacuated area called Yamakiya Village, which is, frankly, if you drew a straight line between the power station and Fukushima City, it's on that line. So it was evacuated, and only 30% of the people have returned. I met with the de facto mayor. He's a volunteer because it's a small town, and he said that 70% of the people don't want to go back, and for many different reasons, and I'll go into that in a little while. That was Yamakiya Village. In Futaba Town, the one that I talked with the mayor, Futaba Town, by the way, is one of two towns that within its jurisdiction hosts the Daiichi nuclear power station. The power station straddles Futaba Town and this other town called Okuma Town.
It's like one of the closest towns to the nuclear power plant, right?
Literally right there. I mean, the power station is in their jurisdiction.
Okay.
And the mayor expects not more than 30% of people to return once the evacuation order is lifted in the 2022 to 2025 time frame. So that 30% Yamakiya, not more than 30% Futaba. But then here is Kawauchi Village, which is just a couple of kilometers from Yamakiya, which was also evacuated, and 80% of the people have returned. Unfortunately, I have not gone to Kawauchi Village to study it yet, so I don't know why so many of the people have returned there. So 30%, 30%, 80%. Those are the examples that I have.
Well, people's lives change over time, regardless of radiation. People's jobs, they have new jobs, they have new friends, they have different locations for schools. So many things can happen in somebody's life, and some of those may be the fear of radiation, but others might just be life situations, just like moving away from another city. And
absolutely. I mean, if you went to California for 8 years and then someone says, time for you to come back to New York, it'd be really difficult. I'm going to tell you a story. In November, just a few weeks ago, I was invited to speak at something called the Global Seminar. The Global Seminar is held at this large complex, which is like Japan's Peace Corps complex. And once a year, they have sessions put on by people from different countries. So we have people from Africa, South America giving sessions. I was invited as the American guy, because I'm from Hawaii, to talk about my observations of Fukushima to the audience. And I gave my speech. Afterwards, a lady came up to me and she was crying. Wow. She's a school teacher who lived in a place called Tomioka, which is one of the cities in the evacuated area. She doesn't live in Tomioka anymore. She evacuated to another city where she is teaching and where her family lives. And she said, in the new place, I do not tell people where I came from, because that would create so many problems for her and her family. But she was really grateful that I was there explaining how I told people in Hawaii and New York about what is really going on in Fukushima, because she said more people need to do that. There is so much misunderstanding and lack of trust. And that was one really good example, a human example of what is going on in Fukushima now.
What is now, this is something that, as an American, I've read about. I've never been to Japan. I'm sure you can tell me whether this is true or not. The culture of Japan, the Japanese people, do they not tend to kind of not encourage foreigners to live among them or shun foreigners away? Did you find that at all in your case?
I think culturally, you're right. There is a greater suspicion of foreigners in the country areas. In Tokyo and Osaka, obviously it's not, because those are so international and people come and go from many different countries. The farther away you move from those major cities, for example, to Fukushima, which I consider country, the more you run into country-type beliefs that, oh yeah, oh, that's an American over there. You know, they'll still think that you're somebody special or somebody different or someone unique. And if you said, oh, I'm planning to move to Fukushima, it would probably, they'd probably have to think about that. However, let me say this. When we moved to Fukushima, my wife and I said, this reminds us a lot of Hawaii. The people here are very friendly and open, and they're not devious, if I can just say that. They're just honest people in this country area. There are almost 2 million of them, and they have been handed a very bad set of cards, in my opinion. That's one of the reasons why I'm there, trying to help them.
But so it sounds like you feel accepted there, though. You don't have a problem with the way you're treated there, right?
No, I do not have a problem there. In the beginning, everyone asked me my motive. Why are you here from Hawaii trying to find out what is going on? But as I showed them, I am researching, and then I write articles, and I gave some speeches about my observations in Fukushima, then they felt that I was not a threat. They knew that I would say exactly what was on my mind because I'm an American, but I was not a threat to them or not problematic. And that's the way that I have perceived the evolution of how people see me in Fukushima over this past 8-9 months.
Okay. You mentioned, okay, we talked about you own a Geiger counter, you do your own checking, you have found the numbers to be correct. Let's talk about food, water, because you can't check food or water with a Geiger counter. So, what is the situation there with food? I happen to know that Japan has some of the most stringent testing of their food. I think it's 100 becquerels per kilogram, and that's 5 times more stringent than the European Union standards and about 10 times more stringent than the US standards. But what is the general attitude about the food there? A lot of the people come on my channel and say, oh, they don't eat their own food, that's why they're living longer. And I say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Explain about what you see there with dealing with food.
Sure. Most of the people that I've met in Fukushima, in fact, I haven't met any exceptions to this, that if you buy your food at the market or 7-Eleven or wherever that is, it's perfectly safe. Everyone believes that. If you were to grow your own food in the backyard, that food, unless you have it tested in a germanium semiconductor, which you probably know, then you should not be giving that food to anybody else. If you want to eat it and take a chance on it, fine, that's your own backyard food. But the food that is sold in markets and stores to others for commercial purposes that I buy, I am completely satisfied that the food is safe from radiation. I have visited farmers, sat down with them, asked them about what they do and what's happened since March of 2011. I have talked with cooperative type people to ask them, how is this food processed? And then I have also read about the GAP program, the Good Agricultural Practice program that Fukushima has started, which includes radiation testing. So there are so many institutional things that are there in place to ensure that the food is safe. I explain that to people because, first of all, as you know, my personal dosimeter, I cannot put it up to an onion and see if it's safe or not. that onion has to go into a machine. It's a different type of machine that tests food. So the foods are tested stringently in those machines before going to market. And that was very important to me because you get exposure to radiation externally, like you walk around or you go to Daiichi nuclear power station and you absorb the radiation, or you get it internally because you eat the food or you drink the water. So I had to satisfy myself through research, asking a lot of questions, and then making the decision that, hey, this stuff is safe, I'm fine with it. And as I talk to the local people who eat the same food and drink the same water, they feel the same way. What's really interesting, though, is, I don't know if you saw in the news, where national government and prefectural government wanted Fukushima vegetables and fruits to be served to the Olympic athletes in July, next July. And there is this huge pushback. Part of it is political, coming from South Korea, but there is a huge pushback that, how can you tell us that the food is safe? We're going to bring our own Geiger counters, etc., as a response. When I read that, it told me Fukushima still has a long way to go in overcoming this negative reputation. But you may hear more about it as we approach the Olympics, because the Olympic Games are next July.
Yeah, South Korea, of course, has been doing this for a long time. They've even announced they're going to be bringing their own food to serve their own athletes, which is kind of comical because the testing methods from the Japanese side is going to be more stringent than that from the South Korean side. So it's kind of funny that they're actually going to be bringing in their own food, which may be more contaminated than what they would have been served if they had eaten right there the local Japanese food.
I think that, I explain to people that you may not trust national government, prefectural government, TEPCO at the highest levels, but when you get down to the operational level, people who are actually doing work, holding the Geiger counter, escorting people, checking food, etc., those people live in the area. Their families eat this food, drink this water, and are exposed to what we're exposed to. And I say, these are smart people. Do you think that they would expose their families to that kind of risk if there was a risk? And of course the answer is no.
What can you tell me about the water? Is it the same as the food?
Yes, I had studied the water, and I don't have my printout. I got a explanation from one of the technical guys that I have a great deal of faith in how they test the water and why the water is pure. I did have the testing results that there has been no, it's almost, what's the word that they have? A trace shows up, but definitely not at a level that anyone should be concerned about. And furthermore, that particular article that I read talked about the water in the States, the United States, and other areas, and the Fukushima water was better than those.
Yep. Okay, let's talk about the Olympics, because in a few months we're going to have the start off of the Olympics, and I think that everything that looks like, unless they're going to change their plans, is actually going to be starting in an area of either in or very near the exclusion zone and going all the way to Tokyo. Is that correct?
Yes. In March, the Olympic torch lighting ceremony will kick off in Japan at a place called the J Village, which was the original National Soccer Training Center, but converted to a disaster operational center right after March 11th. Well, a couple of years ago, they booted everybody out and remodeled it, cleaned the place up. Now it is a modern sports facility that will host the Olympic torch lighting ceremony in March. What's interesting about J Village is Greenpeace came out with their little article a few weeks ago saying that in their research they found a few hot spots around J Village, not in J Village, around J Village, and that it is a cause for concern, and that here we go again. So what I did was I asked my technical friends, what is that all about? Because I didn't know that. And they said, thanks to Greenpeace, in the outside areas, in the greenery, they found a few hot spots. So TEPCO was dispatched there and took away the soil, took the measurements, and everything seems to be okay. And what he said was, if these hot spots were in forested or semi-forested areas, he can understand why there may be a few more. But he said most people they will either not go there, or if they go there, they don't stay there very long. It's not like they're sitting in the stadium, which has low levels of radiation. But that came up recently, and frankly, after I read the Greenpeace story, I was expecting more, but I haven't seen anything else as a follow-up.
Well, Greenpeace has an agenda. Everybody knows that. That's one thing. The numbers that Greenpeace came up with do not match anything we've seen on Safecast or any of these other sites. And like you said, if you go off into the woods or something, you might find a little higher radiation. And so this is expected. When I saw the word Greenpeace, I immediately dismissed it because I've seen all the numbers from everywhere else, and nobody agrees with Greenpeace on this issue. So let me ask you quickly also before I get back to the Olympics, are wooded areas off limits at all in these areas that are not in the exclusion zone?
Yes, the heavily forested areas are off limits because what happened was in the decontamination, besides the urban areas and the streets and the side of the streets, they went inwards a little bit if you were in a forested area, so many meters, and they cleaned that up. But into the more heavily forested areas, they did not decontaminate. So there's a difference depending on where you stand.
Okay, and also real briefly about the wildlife. We know wild boars, for instance, have flourished, and I assume that's in the exclusion zones when there's no people. Have you had an experience of that? It's not in the forested areas near areas that are not in the exclusion zone. It's mostly in the areas of the exclusion zone, right?
Okay, let me explain about boars. I almost sent you a picture of when I was driving on a freeway in Fukushima Prefecture, not in the exclusion zone. You'll see signs on the side of the road with boars on it. Boars are prevalent in Fukushima Prefecture because of the forested areas. In the evacuated zones, there were several articles about boars that showed up roaming through the evacuated town. And in fact, that house that a resident took me to in Futaba, on the way there, she said, "Look, there's a boar trap. It's like just a metal thing with a door that goes up and it slides down in case the boar goes inside." And the way she described it is like, this is normal life there. When we went to her house, we went inside and it looked as if time had stopped, literally. It's as if your house, all messy, you just walk out the door and you return 10 years later, and that's what it looked like. But she said, you see these glass doors and windows here? Boars broke in and chewed up some stuff, so we put up extra plywood along the perimeter to keep them out. Boars are a fact of life in Fukushima Prefecture. When they had the boars with radiation, they started taking them out, if I can put it that way. They hired people to go look for them and kill the boars. I don't know the exact status. I have not heard about boar problems in a long time, in years actually.
Okay, but the articles I've been Chernobyl was the same way. Wildlife just kind of took over when people left. Is that generally true in the exclusion zones?
Yes, exactly, because you have forested areas, and it's humans who went into those forested areas and built our houses. But if we're no longer there, the animals who were there before will return. And that's what's happened in Fukushima.
Okay. Let's get back to the Olympics. Do you think there's any reason for anybody, because there's some movement to boycott the Olympics and not attend and making a big deal about it. Do you see any problems with anyone attending the Olympics in 2020?
You mean in terms of radiation?
Yeah.
No, absolutely not.
Well, I knew the answer to that, but I just wanted to get you to say it because there's such a movement right now, especially from South Korea, to boycott the Olympics because of Fukushima radiation. And of course, I'm asking them, well, what Fukushima radiation? Show me where it's radioactive anywhere the Olympics are going to be held. And it's just not. It's just there's not an issue there. But people still, they want to drum that till...
Yeah. There are three things involved in this, this discussion about radiation. One is the science of radiation and microsieverts, millisieverts, and actually describing what the levels are. The second is the political discussion. It's an overlay with which countries like South Korea, which use radiation as cover for their objections to other things that happen. But the third thing that is more common among the public is emotion. Because radiation scares people. It's an emotion. People are scared to death about radiation. And facts cannot overcome emotion. That is a problem that Fukushima has had, and that is a problem that I became very aware of as I have been explaining the current situation of Fukushima to people who are deathly afraid of radiation. Hey, can I just mention, in my research, before moving to Fukushima, I looked at a lot of information from especially U.S. universities. But I want to mention a couple of books that are very, very pertinent to this discussion. The first is called Strange Glow by Dr. Timothy Jorgensen from Georgetown University. Have you ever heard of that book?
I've heard of it, but I've not read it.
It's a wonderful book. And one of the things that Dr. Jorgensen talks about, he's an associate professor of radiation medicine at Georgetown, is how when electricity was first being developed, there was great fear and suspicion from the public because they didn't understand electricity. And he was making a parallel between what happened with electricity and where the public fears are with radiation today. That's a very, very interesting discussion that he had on that. The second really good book is on Chernobyl. It's called Midnight in Chernobyl by Adam Higginbotham, Simon & Schuster. And this book is considered to be one of the most thorough and most scrupulously reported books on Chernobyl. You have a lot more than the HBO series in this book. So those two books I would highly recommend to anyone interested in Fukushima, and especially those who are fearful of radiation.
And it's mostly just ignorance. It doesn't mean people are stupid. They're just unaware of the facts about radiation or Fukushima. I deal with it all the time. We've become so propagandized over the last 50 years that it's been drummed into our heads from childbirth. It's really been a problem all throughout our recent history, all throughout our generation. It's been that way. It's just, I can't escape it. I try to show people facts and they just don't want to believe any of it. All they remember is the movies or media, what they've done to that.
By the way, I'm going to send you a small book by Dr. Noboru Takamura. He's from Nagasaki University. He's the chair of the Atomic Bomb Institute there in Hiroshima. He's been to Chernobyl 30 times. So he knows Nagasaki, Hiroshima, Chernobyl, and he was the first consultant that Fukushima Prefecture brought in right after the nuclear accident. And Dr. Takamura explained to me over lunch one day, the people who had evacuated were all assembling in school gymnasiums, in public halls. They were all scared to death. No one understood radiation. That's his work. So he was called in, and he said he was surprised. He's a Japanese doctor. He said he's used to respect. He had never seen so much anger directed at a speaker in his life. But he said he stood there patiently for hours and answered question after question after question about radiation and whether all those people were going to die. And his questions and answers from those meetings and from a newspaper column that he had after that were put into a book. I'm going to send that book to you. It's called Radiation Q&A, issued by Nagasaki University. That's the third leg of information that I really recommend for anyone interested in Fukushima.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me ask you about your family. Have you been able to convince them that it's safe for you to be there?
Yes. The most difficult one was my wife. When I first told her that, I was thinking of going back to Fukushima and looking at projects to do, she thought, that's okay. So we went, we did our recon. After the local residents asked me to research and write, and I told her I'm thinking of moving to Fukushima. And she said, why? And I said, because you can't do that kind of work from Hawaii. And I said, okay, well, I'll tell you what, let me complete my research and I'll show you what I got. So that was part of my research. As I mentioned, all the articles, scholarly articles, books, and I explained what I found about Fukushima. And she then accepted it and said, okay, let's do it. When we went to Fukushima, of course, that's another story. Now you have boots on the ground. But as we drove around and talked to different people who felt very comfortable in Fukushima, then she has come to the point where it's almost like me. Well, okay, Fukushima is in pretty good shape, but people just don't know it. So why don't you go out and tell them? That's her telling me that. That's my job to do that. And my other family members, my brother and sister-in-law here in Hawaii, my friends, Rotary friends here in Hawaii, also started from the same point. You're going to Fukushima. Why are you doing that? Isn't it unsafe there? Because they didn't know. All they had seen was through the media back in 2011 and 2012. And as I gathered information, I started sending them my articles and data that I have received. And they said, okay, now we understand what is going on in Fukushima. Those models of patiently trying to explain to people how Fukushima has evolved is the way that I have been trying to do that with the public through speeches and through articles that I've written. I've managed to open people's minds, and I'm not trying to force anything on anyone. What I'd like them to do is open their minds, because I have new information that nobody else seems to be providing to the rest of the world. And why don't they take a look at it? Once they take a look at it, they tell me, wow, I didn't know that this was going on in Fukushima. You're right. There has been quite a change there since what we've learned from 2011.
Okay, last month, I think it was last month, you went for the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station, and you had a guided tour. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Daiichi nuclear power station was a big mystery to me. I think it's a big mystery to everyone in the world. When I first went to Fukushima, I didn't even want to go close to it. I wanted to look at it from miles away, which is what I did. But as I learned more about conditions and overall in Fukushima, and as I read about the improvement in conditions at the nuclear power site, I decided I wanted to go there on a tour. You can't just show up at the gate. You need to make a reservation, which is what I did. As I mentioned, I had been into the restricted areas 4 times before this, and I thought I would get the usual tour, which is what I was told from people who had been there, which is you get on a small bus, they take you around, they show you stuff, they take you back to the admin office, they give you a little briefing, and you're on your way. And that's what I expected. What I didn't expect was we stopped at different points on the Daiichi nuclear power station which at times I thought were uncomfortably close to the nuclear reactors. The first time we stopped, we were 100 meters away on a knoll looking at all of them. And I said, what's the reading here? There was a guy from TEPCO whose only job was to carry the Geiger counter and show us the reading. So we looked at it and we said, okay, but we're not staying here. We're only staying here minutes and then we're moving on. The map that I showed you gives the route. We stopped in front of Unit 1 and 2. We stopped at the tritium water tanks. We stopped in front of Unit 4, went behind the buildings, and we're at the ocean to look at the ocean wall. Then we took a more general tour of the site. And when you first get there, besides really checking who you are, they log in a lot of information. They test you for what your internal radiation level is, because they'll test you at the end when you leave, and they'll tell you how much radiation you've absorbed. I absorbed 50 microsieverts per hour based on my tour there. But as we were going through on that high point, 100 meters away, we were reading 130 microsieverts per hour. Then near reactor number 3, we were at 280 microsieverts per hour. And as I said, we stayed minutes in all of these places because we didn't want to absorb too much radiation. We had 4 people in our group and 4 TEPCO engineers. Everyone had an engineer kind of keeping an eye on us. And, I understand that you'd be worried that TEPCO would not be forthcoming and so forth. But these guys, when I asked questions, there was no hesitation. They answered all my questions. So I was pretty satisfied with what I saw. I wanted to see the site, because I have public works background. I wanted to see how organized the place was, how clean it was, whether the dirt areas had been covered over with concrete, which they were, so you don't have dust flying up into people's faces, those kinds of things. And overall, I thought that the general condition of the site was as good as it could be right now. They're planning on starting retrieval of the fuel in 2021 that came out recently. So that's my observations of the tour at Daiichi Nuclear Power Station.
Were you allowed to bring your own Geiger counter at that time?
We were. I didn't bring mine. I left it in the car. I was just referring to the TEPCO guys' Geiger counters.
Okay. But did other people have their own personal Geiger counters with them?
No, they did not.
Okay, but you were not restricted. You could have brought it with you.
I could have, yes.
Okay. So you trust the numbers that you were seeing?
Yes.
Did you feel the tour was limiting? In other words, is there somewhere you pointed to and say what's over there, but no, we can't go over there, or we're not going to show you? Did it seem like public relations was very controlling in something like that?
Well, I did not ask to go inside the reactor. That's a whole nother situation.
Right.
We were wearing the light suit with mask, cap, or helmet, booties, etc. To go into the other areas, you need a higher level of permission, and you need to be fully suited. And frankly, I did not want to go in there.
Okay, so you didn't go see the spent fuel pools on top of the reactor buildings. You did not see those, right? Okay, we've seen a lot of videos of that. I just wondered if you got the feeling that they were. In other words, people are going to ask me, well, are they hiding something? Why can't we go there? But the trip was obviously planned for you. Did it seem like it was very limiting to you?
I thought that I expected a limiting tour, but what I got was more than what I expected. So based on my needs as sort of an investigative reporter kind of person, but not a nuclear physicist or someone who could understand what was going on with the fuel, I saw enough.
Okay. Well, we know that I think the current numbers are close to 4,000 people actually go to the plant every day to work on the cleanup efforts. So it's like if they're not as scared to go there and then they're actually there 8 hours a day for weeks or months on end, I'm not sure why people think it would be dangerous just to visit there in any case. And this is going to be one of the most highly monitored workforce and highly monitored sites in the world. But yet people think they're going to die by being there. And frankly, no one has died. Not even any of the workers have died due to acute radiation poisoning. So that's
correct.
That's something that people always seem to miss. They think they're dying in California because of something from Fukushima. I said, no, there's 4,000 people standing right next to those reactor buildings, and they're not dying. How are you going to be dying from in California? People don't understand that. Okay. Now, what other work do you? What's your future? What kind of work do you still want to do?
Well, as I mentioned, I am in Fukushima until the middle of February when our house lease runs out, and we'll return to Hawaii. But I am still planning to write several more articles for a Hawaii newspaper. One is on the public health issue of the evacuated people. So in January, I have my first visit to one of the mental health centers in Fukushima City. That will be part of my research. Public health. I am going to write an article on decommissioning at Daiichi nuclear power station from a layman's perspective and not from a nuclear physicist's perspective. And I'm doing heavy research on business revitalization, which frankly will be the engine that drives that region. And what the national government and the prefectural government have set up is something called the Fukushima Innovation Coast Framework. If you were to look at a map of what this framework represents, it's about almost 28% of the prefecture on the ocean side. It includes land in the evacuated area, on the sides of the evacuated area, north and south of it. They're planning on focusing on robotics, nuclear decommissioning, agriculture, forestry and fisheries, energy, environment, and recycling. So I am going on a tour. I'm trying to get a tour in December, but it'll probably be in January, to look at this Innovation Coast area. I've already met with the officials to get the information about what's being planned. New businesses are coming in. High-tech businesses are coming in. A lot of it is to provide expertise for decommissioning of Daiichi and Daini nuclear power stations, which, although the government may say it'll be 30, 40 years, I say it's like a 50-year proposition. So there will be jobs on the coast for decades, and those jobs will be the drivers that help to bring people back, assuming decontamination programs are effective. The drivers will help build residences, warehouses, industry, etc., etc. So that is the third article that I'm writing. In May, I was asked by the U.S.-Japan Council to go back to Fukushima and give a revitalization presentation to a number of U.S. MBA students coming from the United States, going from Tokyo to Fukushima. They want to learn about revitalization, so I have a commitment to give a revitalization talk in May in Fukushima. In June, Think Tech Hawaii, that did an interview with me, which is the one that you saw, will do a second interview about Fukushima. And the timing will be great because I'll have up-to-date information. It will be 1 month before the Olympic Games start. So it will be an interesting look at Fukushima literally right before the Olympic Games start. Those are the things that I'm still working on right now.
Do you plan on getting another lease, another place to live?
Well, we're going to be in Japan through the middle of February. I will be returning, from time to time, because I enjoy Japan, different parts of it. But our home is in Hawaii. We're Hawaii people. We're Americans,
Okay, well, yeah, I understand that, but you had a year lease, if I recall, and I just wondered, you have a lot of engagements already. I'm wondering if you were going to go another year.
No, I decided not to, and part of the reason is this. In order to set up the legal regime for me being in Japan, I applied for a visa, a long-term visa, because I am a third-generation Japanese American. And there is a category in their immigration law that provides for that. I asked for a 3-year visa. They gave me a visa for 1 year. So my visa is up in the spring of next year. And although they say I can apply for an extension, it was such a heartburn just to get a 1-year visa. I'm not going to try and get an extension on that visa. So that means that I cannot stay in Japan on a long-term basis. I would be subject to the 90-day tourism rule. I go there for 90 days, got to come back to Hawaii, go back, etc., etc.
Have you been invited to the Olympic Games yet?
No, I mean, the local folks had wanted me to participate in helping foreign people in Tokyo, but logistically that's impossible. But what else happened is, I mentioned that I'm an American Red Cross volunteer here in Hawaii. The Japanese Red Cross asked me to help coach some of their staff in January. So I have a couple of English sessions with the Japanese Red Cross in January to help them become ready for foreign visitors who may need to go to the Red Cross. And that is in preparation for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics.
Okay.
That's it. I think that's enough.
Yeah, I thank you for the interview. You have anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
No, I just want to reiterate what the theme has been throughout our conversation here, that I think the world public simply has not been informed, not kept up to date on what's happening in Fukushima. There are no good vehicles to do that. There are no trustworthy organizations, NPOs, or people who are doing that. And absent that, all the public is left with is what they thought about Fukushima after the March nuclear disaster. And those are negative thoughts. So it's only natural that it's like that.
Yeah, 2 solid weeks, if I recall, of nonstop coverage showing things blowing up. That's what we saw on TV back then in March of 2011.
That plus follow-up reports of radiation bores roaming the street, the robots dying in the nuclear power station. Those follow-up reports were all negative, and it just reinforced the notion that people developed back in 2011.
Yep, back in 2011, when I was doing shows and I specialize in radiation detection and radiation detection equipment, I saw a huge increase in my business for about 2 weeks. As long as it was in the news, all of a sudden it was a big concern. They didn't care a thing about it before, but then all of a sudden I was the most popular guy at these shows. And then when it was no longer in the news, people just, they walk away. They're done. So it's like in the preparedness industry, for people that were seeing me, they weren't preparing, they were reacting. And the press pumps up the fear, and we just get this negative reaction. And ever since then, that's the negative connotation they've received, is just what they've seen in the press. Just like we've talked, just like we talked about and what you've alliterated here all throughout this program.
If one of your viewers or listeners went to Fukushima, rented a car, and drove all over the prefecture, they probably say, "What the heck? This place looks normal. This is not what I expected."
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I could go there myself. And people have been sort of threatening to, well, we'll raise a GoFundMe and we'll send you there. And, you know, they thinking I'm going to die. And I say, you won't want me to go there. I'm going to take daily radiation readings. I'm going to show them on YouTube. I'm going to eat the local food. And I'm going to make a video every day. And then that will just destroy your little ghoulish fantasies. Because they think for some reason going there, I'm going to die. It's just amazing to me. People who refuse to do any research on this at all. Okay, well, Steve Terada, I do thank you for this interview. It's going to be rather long, but I think it's worthy of putting on the air, and we're going to leave it up. As long as they don't tear it down, we're going to keep it up, and you can keep watching back, and you're going to see a lot of, hopefully there's going to be positive comments, but if you see a lot of negative comments from trolls, I hope you can deal with that, because I don't remove comments like that. So you're going to see some of that, and I hope you just brush it off, because they're probably going to be from people who didn't even see the program.
Yeah, when I did my Think Tech Hawaii Law Across the Sea interview program and went on YouTube, one of the respondents who wrote in says, "This can't be true. Something like this is all lies. It's just a knee-jerk reaction that comes out from people when they see information come out on Fukushima." And so I expect all kinds of reactions once this goes out.
Yep, and you will get it on my channel, guaranteed. Sorry to say. All right, Steve, I thank you very much. Maybe we can do this some other time. If this becomes real popular, we can maybe even do a live show with a question and answer or something. Who knows? So thank you, Steve, for joining me. And I thank everybody for staying with it to the very end here. All links below relevant are going to be shown below in the description box. So please look at all that and do your own research. Don't believe anything that I say or Steve does. Do your own research. Thanks everybody for watching. So long.